We don't have a softball team as an official Crossroads Calvary Chapel. Hard. That's great. Man, I so appreciate. Bill, this was awesome because, man, I'm so glad my team's here to hear that first part, just what is worship. That was fabulous. And then the practical part. What really helps is some of the things that I've been saying that they don't take me serious. Now they've heard you say it. So now we're cool. Awesome. I get to do some practical, how to build a worship team, just very, very practical. Just a little background of where I'm coming from. Was raised in church, always involved musically from the very beginning, played piano all my life and writing songs and arranging, and was in the Assemblies of God for years as a music minister and worked at some large churches and had the choirs and the ensembles and the orchestras and all of that. Led a lot of worship teams, built a lot of worship teams, and then God called me to do this church plant that became a Calvary Chapel. Now, all of that said, that qualifies me to teach this lesson because of this. That means everything I teach this morning, I did it wrong. It doesn't mean I come up here and say, well, because I did all that, that's my resume, now I know what I'm talking about. It means, hey, learn from my mistakes. Learn from all the things that I did wrong all of those years. Very practical stuff. What do I go to? Quarter till? Yes. So I start with this, how to build a worship team. Well, I found it's best to start by building a worship team with people. I tried animals, and they didn't work as well. Had some dogs and cats and things, but they just messed up the stage because they didn't, they would make your stuff on the stage. So I tried to go people. People's the right way. Now, past that, once I get past using people, how to build a worship team, now we've got a ton of variables. Because what is a worship team? Well, what I wanted to kind of show this morning, the reason we did 3 different looks, was we did the whole full band for 2 songs. We broke it down to just these guys for 1 song, and then just keyboard, because when we're talking a worship team, it can be, depending on your church and your setting, a worship team can be 1 person with a guitar. It can be 1 person a cappella. 1 person a cappella can lead in worship. Did you know that? You don't have to have all the stuff. I found out when we planted our church in 1999 how little you need to start a church. I always thought you needed all the fancy stuff. You know what you need? You need a guy who's called and a Bible he can preach from. That's about all. So leading worship can be a cappella. It can be 1 person just standing in front. It can be 1 person with a guitar, a piano, soundtrack. I've seen some churches do a great job of just leading by soundtrack. I know a church recently that started up, that was the best way. They played the integrity tracks and they had the words on the screen. And then they went from there to, from the words on the screen, they started having some singers singing with the soundtracks. They went from there to the band. You can do it a lot of different ways. The sound and video people, did you know your sound and video people are part of the worship team? They are. Absolutely. And you want them to like you. You want to be very friendly. Buy them Krispy Kremes as often as possible because they control you back there, right? Sound and video guys are part of the worship. What's that? Dunkin' Donuts coffee. See? If you go here, that's what they need. It goes from there. More singers, few instruments. Few singers, more instruments. As far as a team, look, it even says in the Calvary Chapel Distinctives book that there's no right form of Calvary Chapel worship. I appreciate that Pastor Chuck put that in there. Because you can go to different, some people think Calvary Chapel is a guy with a Hawaiian shirt and sandals playing the guitar singing Maranatha music. That's what they think Calvary Chapel worship is. But you can go all over Florida, all over California, all over the country and see a whole lot of different styles. When I was joining Calvary Chapel, that really blessed me. I feel cheated because I did not know what Calvary Chapel was. Raised in church, my whole life, Bible college. I'm the anti-Calvary Chapel pastor. I'm the guy that actually was raised in church. Most of them were, surfers and doing all this stuff, and I'm not that kind. I'm the anti-Calvary Chapel pastor. I never heard of Calvary Chapel. And so when I was thinking, oh, man, I really love what this is. I need to see if my worship fits in. I started traveling around, and I went down to Calvary Chapel, Merritt Island, and I heard Mary Barrett, and I heard Joel and Bev, and then I went over to Sarasota and heard Carl Dixon and heard the guys over there. I went down to Fort Lauderdale and heard those down there, and I thought, wow, there's variety. There's a variety. So that was awesome for me to see. Worship can be there's no right style. Okay, so let's move on to building a team. How am I going to build a Crossroads team or a worship team? Our team you saw today, we're trying to build different styles. I like that myself personally. Some churches will say we're going to do the same style every Sunday. I'm really trying to work now on building different teams where not all of us will be on the stage on every Sunday. I think it's good for the musicians to have times when they're sitting in the congregation and just being part of the worship congregation. So we're building different teams together with the musicians that we have. What the most important thing is, and I'll touch on this, Bill did such a great job, but I want to touch on this before I get into actually building the team. The most important thing is that you are leading worship. And when I've talked about leading worship before and taught leading worship before, my number one point is if they're not singing with you, you're not leading. If every Sunday, every song, the band is great, but the congregation's not singing, you're performing. And I'm all for performance worship is good in its setting. But if the people are not singing, and I so appreciate all the practical teaching there, the right key, the right style, because the whole point is, are they singing with you? Now, there are obviously times you're teaching a new song, or some other times it is more of a performance kind of setting. But for the most part, if we're leading worship, they need to be singing with us. So here we go. Now, most of you probably, how many of you are actually, you are the leader of your worship team? You're the leader. Because we have here some worship leader putting a team together, and we have a lot of team members. Because my session is called Building a Worship Team, I'm kind of talking about how a worship leader puts together a team. How does that help you if you're not the worship leader? It helps you understand your worship leader. Because now maybe you can start, some of the crazy things he does that you go, why in the world? Maybe now you'll go, oh, okay, I get it now. Now I get it. Because it's different, folks. Listen, I've been there. You're the keyboard player or you're the guitar player. It's so easy to go, boy, if he'd only let me run this team. And then you become the leader. Yeah. Now you get to hear everybody else tell you what songs you're doing wrong, what songs you're doing, how you're doing. Yeah, it's different when you're the leader. Well, here's the deal. Here's what I found all these years of making mistakes. Build your team with this philosophy that's kind of the same as the Calvary Chapel philosophy of how to build your church. Where God guides, God provides. What has he provided? You might want to have a Tommy Walker type worship team. You got a guitar player and a conga guy. You know, you're not going to get this full band sound. Look at what you have. All the churches that I went to as a worship leader, my first job was to assess, what have I got? What talent do I have? What musicians do I have? Now, hopefully, we're going to build on that. But first and foremost, if what you've got that can do worship really well is one guy on the guitar, then have one guy on the guitar. Because it's not about you having a great band. It's about you leading the congregation in worship. That's what it's all about. So what has he provided you in your church? If he's only provided you a few musicians and singers, then that's all you need. I learned this the hard way. If you're going to try to force the issue and build a team your way, God's going to say, hey, have at it. Have fun. I'll be here when you mess up. When you need me. The hardest thing to do, guys, is to remove somebody from the worship team. So you want to build slowly. See what God has provided. Use what he has provided, and don't try to force the issue. Build your team wisely and cautiously, worship leaders. Again, my mistakes that I have made in the past. Here's some wrong reasons to add people to the worship team. Wrong reasons. This might sound weird to you, but here's one of the number one wrong reasons to add somebody to the worship team. Because they're very talented. Wrong reason. That's the right reason to put somebody in your club band that's going to play somewhere outside the church. We're talking a worship team. So you don't add somebody. That is so hard. You worship team, you guys know you worship leaders because you've got a whole. I used to, when we started the church, we didn't have all the musicians. It was basically, it was me on the keyboard, John on the drums, still playing with me, John on the drums, and I had my wife singing. My wife usually is up here singing another part. She's not feeling real well right now, so she couldn't be here today. But I would set up a music stand for a guitar player and a bass player. We didn't have one. We had them developing because, Cortland, you were very young at that time. But we didn't have them. So I said, you know what, I'm going to put, in faith, that's my AG background, all right? In faith, I'm going to put a music stand there because one day, God's going to provide that musician for me. And God has just provided little by little. But you see somebody come to your church and they say, well, I'm a guitar player, and they play something for you, and you go, wow, man, that guy is talented. We need to add him. Stop. Stop the temptation to just throw that person on the worship team because they are talented. You may pay a price later. Hey, reason number 2, why not to add somebody to your team? Because they say they are talented. You know. Pastor, I sing, I play, man. Wait till you hear me. Just go ahead and put me on the stage. And you're just going to be blown away. And you are blown away when they get up there. Because you find out a lot of people think they're talented. A lot of people have been told they're talented, and maybe they're very talented in their own settings. But for you, so don't just jump on because they say they're talented. Another wrong reason to add someone to your worship team, because they sang in the worship team at their last church, or they led worship at their last church. And this happened to any of you guys ever, where somebody comes and says, well, I led worship at my last church, and you hear them and they're very good, and you think, boy, this is great. God, you have provided, until you realize why the pastor kicked them out of the last church. It might be wise every now and then to call the former pastor. Say, hey, this guy just came to my church. He said he led worship at your church, so I'm thinking of letting him lead. He what? Oh, he did. Okay, thanks for telling me. And now you know why he's at your church, so you just say, okay, go slow, go slow. Last reason I'll throw out there, why not to add someone to your worship team? Because they're relatives of yours. Now, that's touchy. Okay, if it's your wife or your child or your cousin, because there's that family issue. But I'm telling you, pray hard, because you have to build the team wisely, build it cautiously. I would recommend just build a worship team slow. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got when I started the church, and we didn't start as a Calvary Chapel. We were finding out about Calvary Chapel. We were independent, and it took us 2-3 years to go through the process and work all that out. But the guy who really helped me had started Calvary Chapel in Daytona, and it's not there anymore. It's not existing. He's going to our church now. But he gave me some great advice. He said, you know what? Don't get yourself a leadership team for about 2 years. Man, it was one of the best advice I ever got, because the people I thought that first month of our church would be my leaders, they were gone in about 6 months. The people I never dreamed, I didn't know they were going to be my leaders, but after a year, after 2, here's how we do it in our church, guys. Cream rises to the top. When somebody comes, I've heard Pastor Chuck say, somebody comes to the church and says, well, hey, I'm a deacon. I need to be a deacon at this church. And I heard him say one time, well, then start deacon, because that means serving. Start picking up trash. We look for leaders. Leaders are the ones that are probably there on Sunday morning. They're probably there on Wednesday nights. They're at your Bible studies. They're at their men's Bible studies. They're there for the church work days. You start to look for that type of a person, and you say, okay, now we can start looking for people who would be leaders. Well, worship team-wise, what is a qualification for someone to be on the worship team? Now, some of you may not agree with this, but here's what I think. They need to be saved. Now, I say that because some don't agree with that. Some feel like, and I'm not going to say, look, I'm not going to say I'm right or I'm wrong. I'm going to say I have the mic, so I get to say what I want to say. Here's what I think. I just think we're asking them to be part of a worship team, and if they're not even saved, they don't even know what that means. I understand the concept of, well, maybe we can get them saved as we bring them in. I'm all for that. Get them saved before you put them on the worship team. Now level of salvation, they don't have to be. Back in my AG days, we were always told the worship team had to be holy. And I always thought to myself, well, that doesn't include me. And I'm the worshiper. In fact, Pastor, that doesn't include you. I saw you the other day. You're never, like Bill said, you're never going to find perfect holiness. I asked a question one time at a Calvary Chapel worship conference on a breakout session. And I asked the worship leader at the time, I said, well, how do you do that? How do you look for people, they should be saved, but do you look for their lifestyle? Do you look for their how they're living? And he put it a good way. He said, you know what? If they are struggling with something, and we're aware of it, and we're struggling with them, and we're trying to help them, and I know they're really fighting something in their life that they're struggling. Well, we're all doing that. So I don't have a problem with that on my worship team. He said, if they've been approached by something, and they don't want to listen to you, and they're fine with how they're living, and they're fine with what they're doing wrong, well, then they probably need to step off the worship team, because it's more of a willful rebellion at that point. I thought that was a good answer. I think they should be saved. I think they should attend your church for a period of time that I happen to be the pastor and the worship leader, so when Bill said, do you talk to your pastor and worship leader, I do all the time. I'm schizo. I talk to myself all the time. Do you think I should? No, don't sing that song. So if you hear that, guys, I talk to your pastor a lot because I think you ought to figure out some kind of, how long do you think they should be at our church before we put them on the worship team? Because here's my deal, and you guys know, I've told my team, if you would go to this church and be fed from the Word and never play or sing, then I'll consider you for the worship team. If the fact that, if I had to remove you from the worship team for whatever reason, and that causes you to leave the church now because you were only there because you could sing or play, then you really needed to go to another church anyway. I want people who this is their home church, this is where they get fed, they're going to be part of that fellowship, part of that family, and they would do that whether you never ask them to play or sing. So I think that takes time. I'd like about 6 months to see the person come to the church. Sometimes they'll come to the church, they'll love the band, and they'll say, man, I want to play. I'm coming from a Baptist church, or I'm coming from Assembly of God, I'm coming from Methodist. I'd really love to get involved in your worship team. And I say, well, you don't even know who we are yet. You don't even know what we believe yet doctrinally. Give me about 6 months, and if I haven't run you off by then let's talk. But let's see, is this going to be a church family that you would want to be a part of? Now, these last 3 points I put together, and it ended up, when I looked at it, I thought, well, that's pretty neat, like a body, soul, spirit qualification. And I don't want to take that into some kind of crazy doctrine. But here's the body part. Why would I add somebody to my team? Well, are they going to fill a part that you need filled? In other words, don't just add your 5th acoustic guitar player if you're fine with 1 or 2. You might have tremendous acoustic guitar player out there, but don't just throw them on the team just because they're gifted and they're talented. We go through this because a lot of ladies and a lot in the churches, we have a lot of sopranos. I have a harder time finding part singers. So right now I have ladies in my church that they want to be a part of the worship team. And I say to them, well, you know what? Maybe we'll build more teams in the future, but for right now, I really don't need any more sopranos. I don't need to have 8 sopranos with 1 alto. So do they fill a part that you need? Well, that's the body part. If they don't, then, tell them, well, maybe we'll develop something later. But for right now, I have a guy right now, he wants to sing on the worship team. He sings bass. I don't know how many of you use a bass singer in your worship teams. I haven't for years and years and years. And choirs, yes, but not in worship teams. So I just had to be honest with him and say, you sing fine bass, but we don't really have a need for that part right now. And you have to be honest and tell people that. Well, that's the body part. Soul part, body, soul, spirit. Soul, do they gel personality-wise and music-wise with the team? Boy, this is where I got burned so many times. People who are good musicians, good singers, but personality-wise, music style-wise, they did not gel with what we had going at all. Now, that means worship leaders, you need to be very aware of who you are. Know your style. Because, listen, there are 100 different types of bass players, 100 different types of electric guitar players, and if you're doing more of an acoustic rock style, and that's the kind of bass player you need, but you get a real jazz, R&B, funky bass player, and he's doing that doesn't fit your style. Does it gel musically? More importantly, do they gel personality-wise? Okay, we are a bunch of musicians and singers, so can we just be honest? We're weird. Musicians and singers are weird. You know who's weirder than that? Sound guys and video guys. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. They speak a different language back there. I've had to spend a lot of my time, as a music minister, I would spend my time interpreting between the tech guys and the musicians because they talk a totally different language. And the tech guys would say something, I have to interpret to the musicians. But sometimes personality-wise, man, you're a wonderful player, you're a wonderful singer. I could really see you working with the team, but personality-wise, you throw something in there that's going to throw a kink into your good mix of personalities, and it could just cause you a lot of trouble. Personality, do they gel? How about this? Spirit, body, soul, spirit. This is important to me. Do they worship in their life and in the congregational setting, whether they are on the stage or not? That's why I think it's important for our musicians and singers, and hopefully I can do this more, to actually get us off the stage from time to time. If this is true, if you see this, worship leaders, that when they're up here, man, and they got the microphone, they're singing and they're worshiping, and you get them down there when someone else is leading worship and they're flipping through the bulletin and they're not singing along, not paying attention. If they're only worshiping when they have a mic in their hand, then there needs to be some pastoral counseling go on here and talk to them. Are they worshipers in their heart before they ever get on stage? Do they worship in the congregation? I think that's a spirit thing. Well, let me move on. I got about 5 more minutes. How do you get the team to be a team? That's how you build it. Now, how do you get them to be a team? I'm a baseball guy. I love baseball, coached baseball. And so it's real big to me. I use baseball analogies a lot in the church. They all know. It's very important to me, if you're a shortstop, that you're not running over and trying to cover first. And my goodness, in Little League, that's the hardest thing to teach them. They want to run all over. Elijah, I've seen you. You're a good player now. This is a good player right here. Yeah. Seen him play on my son's league. You try to get the shortstop to say, okay, here's your area. This is what you do. On this play, you move here. And it's hard sometimes to get the kids to realize when the ball's hit over the second baseman, they want to run over there and get it. No, that's the second baseman's job. So you want to start, and do they have the right heart? Do they have a teachable heart? My band knows because, man, it's hard for them because I'm the pastor too. And there are certain ways I like things. I'm a stickler. I can be picky. And they just have had to learn. I know you can do it this way, but I need you to do this. I know you like to play left field and right field at the same time. I just need you to do left field. And to try to get everybody on the team to play their part that you have assigned as the leader. You're the leader. I'm helping you out, leaders. You are the leader. So when you say, here's what I want you to do, you're the coach. Do they have the right heart to say, okay, I'd really love to do this, but this is what he's asked me to do? Have the right heart and say, I'll play my part on the team. So do they have the right heart? Are you being clear? And this, leaders, we need to work on this. Are we being clear about our style of leadership? I just told you what mine was. Because of my background in the musical and the writing and the arranging, I am pretty picky. Now, these guys, some of you, John, you've been with me a long time. I've mellowed. I used to be a lot more of a perfectionist. But I am kind of picky, and I'm listening. They may not know I'm listening, but I'm listening to every part. I'm listening to what they're singing, and I'll say, no, you can't play. If it says a G sus, you cannot play a G. You have to play a G sus. I heard that G, play that G sus. And they know I'm pretty picky. Now, some of you guys aren't as picky. So let them know what your style of leadership is. Are you going to be the kind of picky guy? Are you going to be the kind that just says, man, I'm just more laid back? Let them know what your leadership style is so they can know what to expect. Here's what I like, and some of you might be different. I like to have organized rehearsals. Now, it doesn't mean I'm a tyrant during rehearsals, but I like to show up on time, and I like to have a plan of what we're going to rehearse. I'm not a big jam session kind of guy. I'm not the kind of guy that says, well, let's just get together and jam and see what happens. That doesn't work too well for me. We have charts. We follow charts. I write out vocal parts. They sing the vocal parts. I like to have more of an organized rehearsal. That's how I do it. Now, biggest thing I tell you, as a worship leader for so long here now, number one thing that I've had to deal with are egos. And any of you who have been a worship leader for a long time, you know. Some of these worship teams that I had to deal with in the past, they didn't have to show up on time. The choir did, the orchestra did, but they came whenever they wanted. They wore whatever they wanted. You didn't touch their mic, even though you were the worship leader, because they were there before you, and they were going to be there after you. I had the hardest time. In fact, at one church I was at, I just went to the pastor and said, you know what, we have a choir. We don't need this worship team, because they're just a bunch of egos. They're arrogant. So we're just going to dismiss the worship team for a while and just let the choir lead the worship, and then we'll start over with good hearts. Didn't work because he was good friends with some of them, and he fired me instead. But anyway, that was my idea. No egos, no stars, no prima donnas, no divas. And if you're going to be, I'm going to give you worship leaders some empowerment today. I think if you have stars, if you have egos, if you have prima donnas, if you have divas, then you need to do some pastoral talking to them. And if they still want to be one of those, then they need to sit out in the congregation for a while and get their heart softened, because that's not going to help your team be a team. I'm real big into right now, and I'm getting close to closing here. I went through all this years. I've been in church work all my life. That can be a plus. That can be a negative. And we went through a lot of years in my former movement where we did leadership training. You know what I found out after about 20 years of leadership training? I had a whole bunch of leaders running around and no servants. Everybody said, well, I'm a leader. I'm a leader. I have this certificate. I went to this class at my church, and I have this certificate, and I have it hanging on my wall, and I'm a leader. I am at the point in my life as a pastor now, I'm done with leaders. I don't want any more leaders. I need some servants. I need servants. So I'm even going now to where I don't want to even use that word. You are a worship leader, or you are the leader of a ministry. No, you're just the lead servant of that ministry. And you are the worship servant. We're supposed to all be serving each other. Now, if you are the lead servant, you are to lead, but you need to do it with a servant's heart. That's what Jesus did. He led with a servant's heart. Doesn't mean he didn't talk tough sometimes, but he led with a servant's heart. And then the last thing, worship leaders, me, talking to me. Let God be the leader of the worship team, not you. Let God lead. Let him lead you and guide you in choosing the right people, because you're going to mess it up. I did for years. Let him lead you and pray about who needs to be on the worship team. Let him lead and guide you in song selection. Man, it amazes me every week. It just seems like, because doing both roles, sometimes it's hard, and I'm trying to balance worship leader and pastor, and I always do my song set before I do my sermon, which is backwards to some of you guys who do both. But I'll get the song set out so I can email that out, and I'll work on my sermon. Do you know how many times I'll get to the end of my sermon, and I'll look down at the next song on the list, and it's perfect. And I tell the church, I'm not that smart. I didn't figure that out. God does that, and I think sometimes he does it just for me, to show me it's not you. It's me. Remember, you didn't even really think about that. You prayed about the song list, and I gave you these songs, and then I put it with your sermon. Just shows it's not you, David. It's me. Pray about your song list. Let him lead and guide you while you lead. While you're leading. These guys up here ought to be worshiping, not just saying, okay, I'm here, follow me. I'm leading. Worship. Worship when you're up here. And in my former life as a music minister, we were always trained at these kind of settings. We were trained. Now, when you're singing, have good stage presence and make eye contact. I found that so awkward, looking at all of you saying, I exalt thee. Eye contact. I tell our team, listen, I don't care if you close your eyes and work. That's not rude stage presence. Worship. And honestly, you worship leaders, you guys know, you're the worship team. The congregation doesn't know how hard it is to worship looking at what's going on out there. Because most of them, I mean, they're flipping through, or they're coming. Do they come late at your church? They come late at my church. I don't know why. And so you're, as a worship leader, you're playing and you're singing, sing, sing, sing. Why are they coming in so late? And make music in the, what, did they break up or something? It's going through your mind. So I have to close my eyes a lot of times. If I'm going to really worship, I have to close my eyes. So I don't mind that. Worship when you're up, when you're leading worship God and let him lead and guide. That's all my time.